Eggs, the podcast featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today we have special guest B. Jeffrey Madoff, founder and CEO of Madoff Productions. Widely considered a storyteller and incisive interviewer, Jeffrey has used his talents to help position major brands such as Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secret, and Radio City Music Hall. Additionally, he's created one of the most popular courses at the famous Parsons School of Design, Creativity, Making a Living with Your Ideas, and has penned the book based on the class, Creative Careers. Too much to pack into an intro, join us here as we explore Jeffrey's creative career, understanding creativity and the misnomer of left versus right brain thinking, defining success, and his wildly popular course at Parsons School of Design. Let's dive into the mind of one of the most dynamic and creative people in the industry. Please join us in welcoming to the show, B. Jeffrey Madoff. Jeffrey, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Welcome, and thank you for doing this. We appreciate you.
Well, we'll see if that's still true at the end.
Yeah. Why don't you give us a brief overview of your career, how you got into what you do and what you're currently doing?
Well, Michael, I've had no master plan ever. So things kind of happened. I think that opportunities are only opportunities if you recognize them as such. And I've recognized certain opportunities in my life, total serendipity, starting off when I was designing my first adult career. Sounds like I was in porn, but I wasn't. My first adult career was fashion design, something that I knew nothing about. And that's been a consistent thing throughout my career, is that I've always started off doing things that I didn't really know much about them. So trial by fire, learning by doing, those kinds of things. I had a degree, a double major in philosophy and psychology from University of Wisconsin. And I wanted to make sure that I had two majors that would assure that I would never get a job. And I succeeded in that. And so I've started businesses not only because I'm entrepreneurial, but my parents were entrepreneurial. My sister has her own business too. So we grew up in that kind of atmosphere. And that's, was never the goal to get a job. And I didn't have any specific goals. It was just the only overarching goal was I have a lot of curiosity. And so I'm seduced by ideas. And so I'm going to pursue things that I really find engaging and seductive. And that's how things started off for me. And that's why I started a fashion company. I was working in a little boutique in Madison, and a dear friend of mine from childhood called me up. He had graduated from college a year before me and said, "Listen, I've saved up some money. Can you think of a gig that would earn more than bank interest?" And that was the starting gun for my first adult career as a fashion designer.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's funny. I mean, hearing what you're saying, some of these like little key moments, this idea of going into something sort of sight unseen or not knowing what you're doing, like this sounds so much like me and Mike's life together. I mean, we've been friends for more than 20 years at this point, and it's like he and I have chased down no shortage of those kinds of things, right? Where it's, oh, well, that'd be cool. Or, hey, maybe we should do this, or, and I think that, maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a curse, but I think it's kind of the plight of the creative mind. And so I appreciate hearing it from you. And I also appreciate, you're a little bit older than us probably. And it seems that you managed to craft a career that sustained you all through life, which I think is really encouraging for a lot of creative people who have their doubts.
Well, I appreciate you saying maybe I'm a little bit older than you, which could mean just that your vision is failing.
He has a small monitor on his.
Yeah, my teleprompter monitor is really small. Right. Yeah, no. So anyway, so I really appreciate that. So I want to talk first maybe about that transition at the beginning, right? Because there's a sort of some recurring themes that pop up on this show that seem to be parts of the career trajectory of people. And one of them is sort of overcoming fear and risk aversion. And the other one is, this idea of pivoting and being able to be somewhat flexible. And so as you decided to, coming out of a school with totally unrelated degrees and decided to take this left turn into fashion, do you mind just talking a little bit about that experience? Like, it seems to me that they're so disjointed, and that, I mean, people go to school for fashion design, right? I mean, this is something that they go into, they have a focus on and build a career around. And so for you to just sort of step in sight unseen, doesn't seem like a foreign concept to me, but it does seem like it's such a left turn that it requires a little explanation. So do you mind talking about just sort of making that, or being willing to take that step, and sort of being willing to, I guess, take the risk or roll the dice on doing something like that?
Well, when I got that call from a friend of mine, and his mother and my mother grew up together. I actually don't remember not knowing him. And it was funny because he had graduated before me. And he said, the money he had saved up, he was willing to send me. Now, that memory's a little hazy. I thought it was 1,500. He thought it was 2,500, whatever it was. On one hand, it was more money than I ever had at one time. On the other hand, it wasn't very much money. So I was working in a boutique in Madison, and I could always draw. My parents encouraged me drawing. They really encouraged me to go forth with any expression that I wanted. So I always wrote short stories. I wrote comic strips, drew them, and wrote the storylines. My parents had retail stores, so they would bring home, when they saw that I loved drawing since I was a little kid, they brought home big sheets of craft paper that they would wrap packages in, and I could draw on those. I could put anything on the walls in my room that I wanted. That was like my space. And so I was always encouraged, which was a huge, huge leg up in terms of whatever it is I wanted to do, because they imbued me to have a certain confidence in what I was doing. So I wasn't reluctant to put it out there. And so in the store, I often wonder, because he called me at the store. This was before cell phones. So he called me at the store because it was a very casual place. I mean, we sold rolling papers and hash pipes at the checkout counter, along with T-shirts, and all the bands that would come through Madison would come into the store because we had cool stuff. And I did the buying for the store. So I'd find interesting, eclectic merchandise and so on. And because I could draw, I felt like, well, I see what sells. I could do this. And I had nothing else in mind. I was just working at the store. So when the idea came about to come up with something that could earn more than bank interest, I thought, why not start a clothing company? It was as available to me as anything else. It's a good thing I didn't say, oh, I'll start a satellite company. I mean, it wasn't something like that. And I was also fortunate to have a built-in test market, which was our own customers. So when I designed some things and had the sewers who did alterations for us, put some things together, put them on the rack in the store, they sold out immediately. Designed a few more things, put them on the rack, sold them out immediately again. So I thought, well, there's something here. I have proof of concept. People that I don't know are actually worth, are willing to pay money to buy what I'm doing. And after 2 or 3 times, we're just replenishing our racks with, not a lot of pieces, maybe a couple dozen, and they kept selling out. I designed a whole line of clothes and put them in a suitcase, strapped it on the back of my motorcycle, and drove to Chicago and went to 18 boutiques. I think I sold 14 or 15 of them. All of a sudden I had like $50,000 worth of orders, which in those days, that was a lot. Like right out of the box, that's almost like $500,000 worth of orders. So it was nuts. What I hadn't thought of was, how am I going to actually manufacture this stuff? Getting the sales was easy. How am I going to make it and get it out there? And it was a very interesting time. We're talking about like 1970, 71. My hair was down. I had hair and it was down to my shoulders. And, young people weren't doing there wasn't a concept of startups. That just wasn't a thing then. And I was fortunate, although I met a number of people who did not want to do business with me because they didn't think I had any money. I met some really good people who were amused in a good way about the novelty of this kid starting a business. And so they were helpful. And I have kind of insatiable curiosity about things. And, when I went to one of the first people that actually had a meeting with me, one of the fabric salespersons, he said to me, so do you have a contractor? You have a lot of orders here. Do you have a contractor? And I said, no. What's a contractor? And, a contractor is somebody who makes the clothes, working at a sewing shop. And so he said, I've got a friend. And I think that you two should meet. I think he can help you out. And this is bringing back some memories, because I then drove to Montello, Wisconsin, very small town. And as I pull up on my motorcycle, and I'm wearing a black motorcycle jacket, jeans, boots, and the guy's name was Jerry Berger, and Jerry has since passed away. But he's standing on outside the front door of his factory, which was no huge factory, but he employed about, 70 people or so. And he's got a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth. And he goes, so you're the designer? I said, yeah. And he said, all right, come on in. And I go in, and I open up the suitcase, and he's looking at the stuff. The cigarette ash is falling into my sample case, And he goes, did you design this shit? I said, yeah, I did. People actually bought this? I said, yeah, they did. And I showed him my orders, and he goes, balls. With me making a shit, you're going to become rich. and he was a great guy and taught me a lot and connected me with other manufacturers. And before too long, I was employing 120 people. I had 2 factories going. I had an office in New York. I was chosen one of the top 10 young designers in the United States, which wasn't a big deal. It's much more impressive than it sounds, because I think there were only 8 of us. I don't know that they could round out the top 10. But, I was on my way. Started doing shows in New York, trade shows and so on, and selling to stores all over the country. And, learned by doing. And some of the knowledge, like what we were talking about earlier, Ryan, before we even started recording, when you were saying all these businesses are essentially alike, there's much more in common than there is different. And that's correct. And I had enough native intelligence, along with experience in selling clothes and knowing the difference between wholesale and retail and certain things like that, and I was also just hungry to learn, because that was survival. Learning was survival. If I didn't figure this stuff out, I'd be out of business. And so I grew that business. I got financial backing, and, had lots of national publicity. And it was a really interesting ride, and something that I entered into it really knowing nothing about. I didn't know about manufacturing. I didn't know about putting together a national sales team. I didn't know about managing that many people, all of those things. So it was a phenomenal learning experience, and some of it was tough. Some of it was really tough. Like when we hit a bad point in the economy, and where major stores were taking 3 months, 4 months to pay their bills, and I had to lay people off. And I was like 22, 23, laying off people that were more than twice my age. And I was fully aware that, they were doing this to support their families. And, it was a lot of life lessons that I learned, that I'm happy I learned so young. And that was quite valuable, and has informed, as everything I have done. And I think everything everybody does, if you're paying attention, it informs what else you do.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack from that story. Just the early days, your learning process and the learning curve from, hey, I've got this idea for the clothing. I'm going to design it. We're going to put it up in our store. We'll do some, since you have the ability to put it on racks and see if it actually sells in the first place, that's proof of concept. Then going out and finding the people you need to actually manufacture it, and then getting it distributed nationally and doing the sales. And that first 5 years of figuring it out, leveraging other people's contacts, being able to build your network and while designing at the same time. And that first little period is always the part that I like to dive deep in, because it's where you learn the most, I think. Just because, as you know, a 19-year-old kid trying to get into fashion, trying to create a product, trying to do all these different things, there had to be times when you're like, am I doing the right thing? Should I really be doing this? Should I just go jump on the motorcycle and go to California and do something completely different? Like that had to cross your mind. Can you maybe talk about your biggest hurdle in the first 5 years? Was it sourcing? Was it finding the person to make it? Was it sales? What stands out in your head as the hardest thing you had to do in the first 5 years?
I guess the hardest thing, it's interesting because all of it was new. Building a sales force was new. I had never done that before. Figuring out, the production flow and how that goes, and finding contractors, because I got screwed over a few times. Finding good sources for the different things that I was doing. And again, it was learn fast or die, was essentially it. And so you learn who to trust, who not to trust. What are the red flags that can come up in a discussion where you know that these people are more bent on taking advantage of you rather than helping you? And so no one thing stands out as the hardest, because they all sort of interweave. It's all kind of a mosaic, and each part is a little tile that forms that whole picture. And so it was just a constant learning process and growing with it. And then getting national publicity. I mean, that was kind of fun to see my stuff or pictures in magazines and newspapers at that time. And that was all cool, but it was all part of the whole. So I can't separate anything out and say, and this was the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because it was like everything's going on. It's like, swatting mosquitoes almost. There's just so many things that are going on at the same time. And so I was in a constant state of figuring things out and trying to grow the business. But what you said, Michael, which is so important, actionable information. Okay. An actionable thing is, and you said this early on in your question, was proof of concept. I don't care what it is you're doing. Your friends can say that something is really great, or your parents can say that it's really cool or something. But until a stranger is willing to spend money on whatever it is you're offering, your service, your product, whatever it is, you don't have a business. So proof of concept is absolutely crucial. And I think I learned that from my parents, because I'd hear them talking about, this line sold, this one didn't. And if it didn't, they didn't rebuy it, So it was a dynamic process all the time of finding what works and what doesn't work, and keeping track. So, not to buy more of what doesn't sell, and to increase the buy on those things that did. And so I learned those valuable lessons really, and I couldn't have articulated them back then, but I learned those valuable lessons back when I was really younger. So I think that one of the crucial things is, an absolute essential things, is proof of concept. How do you know that you've actually got a business? And the only way you know is if there are people that you don't know that have no interest in you or your well-being, like what you're offering well enough to pay for it. Then you've got a shot at creating a business.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I want to also kind of pick out another thing you mentioned early on as you were sort of telling your story. And it's so funny to hear, the story of your fashion career, because really that could have been somebody's entire life, right? And you packed it into these few short years, so it's really amazing that you did all this learning in such a compressed period of time. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is just sort of confidence, right? And maybe I'm exposing myself here, but I think it's true, is that there tends to be among creative people this sort of insecurity, or there's a lot of people who tend to battle these what do they call it? The imposter syndromes and the things like that, right? Where there's a little bit of like, I like to draw, I'm good at this. I have people, buying my work, but I'm still never quite comfortable, right? I always feel like I need to lash out. And even for myself, as business has ebbed and flowed over the years, it's like, oh, maybe I'll go back to work for an agency, or maybe I'll just keep running mine, or maybe I'll do this or that. And then a client will show up, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm glad I stayed the course, So there's this wishy-washiness, there's this insecurity. And the word that you used earlier was confidence. You talked a little bit about how your parents sort of instilled a little confidence in you. And I'm going to play on a couple stereotypes here, but I want you to put on your professor hat and see if we can maybe come up with something that might help somebody who's experiencing these things, because I think confidence is a big thing. I mean, just having the ability to puff your chest out and push through stuff is really important. And I think it's more common in your generation than it is in current generations. And so that trait. And so, but in terms of confidence, so you had the opportunity or the good fortune to have parents who instilled some of that in you. I had some of the same from my mother. And, but the stereotype part is the Midwesterner, the guy from Wisconsin. Those are easygoing people, generally speaking, right? I mean, they're blue collar and you got all that stuff, but they're good people, salt of the earth kind of people. Then you go to Chicago. Chicago's got some attitude and things like that, but New York is like famous for attitude. And so in terms of confidence, it seems like to me, as somebody also kind of Midwestern from out here in Idaho, it seems to me that I would have a hard time transposing my level of confidence into something that would keep pace with some New York guy in the fashion industry. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about just your confidence in developing that as a skill, and what it took you to sort of, go from where you were, which sounds like at a relatively good level to begin with. But how did you sort of push into what is obviously a really fast-paced and highly aggressive kind of career and navigate that without just losing all hope?
Well, that's a big question. And so I want to take it from the notion, first of all, of imposter syndrome, which a lot of people suffer with. And my feeling is, and I've been asked about this a lot, there's even a chapter in my book about it. Everybody's an imposter till you actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the notion of saying, well, I shouldn't really talk about this, I haven't really done it yet. Everybody is an imposter until they actually accomplish what they're trying to do. And so I think that the whole notion of imposter syndrome. Now, if there's a difference between feeling insecure about things and wondering if you can do it, there's also people that are just cons. Now, they're truly imposters because they can't deliver on what they're talking about. They're trying to take advantage of you in some way.
Right. But it occurs to me we should sprinkle in the fake it till you make it bit. The balance there.
Well, the balance really is that you're working towards a certain kind of a goal. And working towards that goal because you haven't achieved it yet doesn't mean that you're an imposter. It means that you're a work in progress. And although I'm older than you guys, I'm still a work in progress. I'm doing new stuff all the time. So, I think that notion of imposter syndrome, it's really unfortunate if one saddles themselves with it. And I'm not talking about being a bullshit artist. I'm not talking about being delusional about your own talents. I'm just talking about we're all in process. And being in process, there's different stages of it. There's those early stages when you're trying to build towards it. And you mentioned the word confidence, and the concept of confidence. So there's two things there, and you talked about risk. There's confidence and there's courage. And confidence is a capability. And that capability is developed through doing it over and over again so that you're reasonably sure of the outcome of it because you've done it so many times. And so you develop confidence through capability. And you develop that capability by doing things over and over again so that you can do it over and over again. And you're confident in your ability to execute on that capability. Courage is you have no idea what the outcome is going to be, and you step off the edge of the cliff. And that's what courage is confronting the unknown with no certainty about what the outcome is going to be. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it takes both. And what most entrepreneurs, for whatever reason, no good reasons, so many entrepreneurs bullshit their way, into trying to present this front that, they've had this hockey stick growth and everything is fantastic all the time. And they've got these secrets. There are no fucking secrets. You have to work your ass off. You have to persevere because you're going to meet a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of people that are going to say no to you, and you have to keep moving forward. And what happens is most people give up because it's painful. It's painful dealing with rejection. It's painful hearing no. And one of the key things that I think is important that I tell myself and I tell my students is don't say no to yourself. There's enough people out there that are going to shit on what you want to do. And so, you have to learn what to screen out and what to ignore and what to embrace. Because there also are people that can give you really good advice that can help you and help you avoid at least some common and obvious mistakes. But you're talking about something I think that Ryan is really important, which is the psychology of the individual. And that's what's really critical. And, what I think is so important about business that a lot of people don't realize is the perseverance necessary to succeed, overcoming those doubts, dealing with the obstacles that you have to confront. And, that's what's really hard. And when you're an entrepreneur, that's a regular feature of it. And a lot of people glorify entrepreneurship. And it's hard. More than 94% of all businesses fail within 5 years. So I don't care if you're doing a play or you're designing clothes or you're shooting, you're DJing at weddings. All of these are startups at some point. And it was another interesting thing is that for my film production company, in almost every first meeting I'd have with a potential new client, they would say to me, well, I'm no Ralph Lauren or I'm no Victoria's Secret. And I said, well, they weren't either when they started. Apple wasn't Apple when they started. They were in a garage. Everybody starts someplace and then they're on this journey. So I think it's really important to have context in terms of realizing that nobody started off some incredible success unless they were born into it and they were heir to the family business that was already huge, and that certainly happens. But in terms of the kind of entrepreneurs that you and I talk to, they're people that are more like us, that they're struggling, they're striving, they're trying to make something happen. They want to build their own business. They have that pride of ownership. And, you develop the confidence by creating the capability, by doing it over and over again. And the courage is another part of that psychological profile where you are willing to take that risk and bet on yourself because you've been able to do other things. And there are foolish risks, so you have to learn how to assess risk and just not be stupid about it. So I think that a lot of this has a lot more to do with psychology than it does with business, but they're also kind of inseparable.
Yeah. So no, it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I'll just add a comment here is, in Mike's experience or mine and Mike's experience in doing this show, I mean, we're 315 interviews into this experience. And it's funny. The point you make is that it seems so obvious when you talk about it, that there is no like real overnight success. But it's funny how many of the entrepreneurs that have come on our show over the years have said just that, right? That they've always, they've got people shaking their hands and telling them how great they are now, but they don't realize that they were truly a 10-year overnight success, right? That it took lots of time and lots of years and lots of failure and lots of everything. And it seems like no matter how often we hear it, it just doesn't get beat into our head. And I think more than ever, with social media and stuff like that, it's so easy to fake appearances and look like things are just, peachy and you've got all the money in the world and you're posing in front of that Lamborghini that actually belongs to somebody else. You're doing all those things, but to the people you're influencing through these social channels or whatever, I think that adds on to this insecurity, right? Is you're going, well, how come I'm not there? I'm doing the same thing. How come we're not famous too, or whatever. And so anyway, I think it's really great that you called that out. Sorry, Mike, to cut you off.
Well, I was just going to say that, I don't know, My screen isn't switching for some reason. Am I showing up on your end?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's not switching on my end, so it threw me off. Anyways, I was just going to say that ignorance is kind of bliss. And when you start at a young age, when you're 19, 20, you don't know what you don't know. So you kind of just do it. And you know, oh, I'll make this clothing line, or oh, I'll start DJing, or oh, I'll open a cell phone store for no reason, because I did that too. Um, we've all been kind of through these things, and we're more willing to take these risks that, you know, as a mature adult, someone who has a home, someone who has kids, someone who has responsibilities, it's a lot harder to say yes to something when you have those responsibilities, and when you have those things looming over your head. The bank can come take the house, the this and that. You almost have to play it safe. But when you're younger and you're willing to jump off that ledge, sometimes you don't realize how far the fall could be until you actually plummet to your business death or whatever it is. And once you go through that once, you're a little more leery the next time, and a little more leery the time after that. And so you kind of play it easier, but really what you're doing is, I think you're kind of maybe hampering yourself, and not, I don't know, like I back in the day doing the concerts, we used to just do them, you know, like didn't, no thoughts, no nothing, whatever, let's just do a concert, we'll do them. But now it's like, if I were to put something together like that, I would be a lot more hesitant because I have a lot more to lose.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you make a really excellent point. You know, when I started off, I wasn't married and I didn't have two kids. I didn't have any kids. And your decisions and the context with which you're making your decisions in change. When I started doing this play, I was consciously trying to channel my younger self, because I know all the odds. You know, there's the old saying that youth is wasted on the young, you know, and by this point, I've fortunately accumulated not only a lot of wisdom, but I've also accumulated a lot of, and this is even as important, relationships. And those relationships that you have maintained throughout your life are the most valuable currency you're ever going to come in contact with. And whether that's people that can help you fund a new business, give you guidance and mentorship on doing it. So you have to assess the risk. And part of assessment of the risk is, what can you tolerate? You know, because if risk really throws you into paralysis of anxiety, then maybe you should listen to your body and not take it on. But if it's just a fear because you don't know if it's going to work, everybody faces that when they're starting something off. Mm-hmm. And when I was moving from Wisconsin to New York, people said to me, "Well, do you have a job lined up in New York?" I said, "No." "Do you know people there?" "No." "Do you have a place to live? You know, you lined up a place to live yet?" I said, "No." "So aren't you afraid of what's going to happen if you move there?" I said, "No, I'm actually afraid of what's going to happen if I stay here."
Yeah.
And the script essentially already being written, if you will. And so that, and I'll tell you, it's something about getting older, is you realize, and this is, you know, such a trope, but it's true, how fast time goes. And it's mind blowing. It's like surreal, you know, how fast time goes. So another part of my self questioning is, if not now, when? And I think that's a question that's important to ask yourself at any stage of life. You know, so do you want to foolishly jeopardize, if you have a family, foolishly jeopardize the financial security for them? That's irresponsible. You don't do that. But maybe that new thing you want to try does have value, and it's overcoming the fear of that unknown and looking at the context and thinking, so how much of this is a risk that I'm really taking? On a 1 to 10, if it's catastrophic, going to screw your life forever, or 1, basically no big deal at all. Most things in business are 2s, 3s, maybe 4s. Most things aren't the catastrophic end of the spectrum. So you also have to have the perspective to realize, well, how much of a risk am I really putting myself out there? What's the worst possible outcome, and how can I avoid that worst outcome so that I can move forward doing what I want to do and not afraid that it's going to jeopardize the security, and because I just can't handle that part of it. And that's okay not to handle that part of it. Nobody's saying, it's not a moral imperative that you have to take chances. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to take chances. That's just the nature of it.
I really like that concept, or this framework of if not now, when, right? And I mean, there's a real factor here in that, time is running out for all of us. Like we need to make them, make hay while the sun's shining. But, there's another version of this that people say, or that I've seen more commonly in business circles, which is sort of the Derek Sivers approach, which is hell yes or no, right? So you either do the thing because you're passionate about it and you want to do it. And if it makes you say hell yes, you go. And otherwise you don't do it. And I think for me anyway, that feels like the luxury of somebody who's already established. What I like about what you're telling, or what you're saying, this, if not now, then when, it gives you the opportunity to figure out when, right? So it's not saying no, it's not saying hell yes, but it's saying, to use your example, you don't want to put a family at risk or anything like that. But okay, so if not now, okay, I can't afford it now, I've got kids now, I've got whatever, when? Well, okay, I'm going to do it in 6 months, and I'm going to save money from now to then so that the financial impact might be less on my family, for example, right? And so I think that yours provides a little bit more action, or gives us the opportunity to take action, instead of sort of the Sivers model, which would just cut it off, or jump in wholeheartedly and, throw caution to the wind. So I really appreciate your advice. I would like to sort of pivot a little bit, speaking of risk and all this stuff, into your post-fashion line or fashion design career. You sort of moved then into film production and shooting commercials and doing all this stuff. And again, kind of like with the fashion business, like there are people who spend whole careers on this and they go to school for this and they become, the people that do those kinds of jobs. And so, but yet you just took the turn and you did it. So can you talk a little bit about that pivot or that transition? I think that, pivoting or career pivots is an idea that comes up a lot on this show, and being able to, successfully navigate something like that. So I wonder if you'd share your experience.
Yeah. To establish the bridge from the fashion world, my financial backer owned banks in Wisconsin, and he liked that I was providing employment for Wisconsinites. And he had been clear from the beginning that one of the reasons he was investing was that, I was kind of a novelty. Here's this kid who's like in national magazines and the press, and he's got a business and the stuff is selling and it's growing quickly. But he said to me that, one of the main reasons he's investing is because I do employ Wisconsinites. They all bank at his bank. And so he liked that. And if I ever moved to New York, he wouldn't continue backing me. And that wasn't a threat. That was just a condition of his investment. And he was a very good man. Well, it got to the point where, from initially being very happy just to go into New York a few times a year, I discovered that I was really a stimulus junkie and loved the city and wanted to be there all the time. And to your point earlier, Ryan, in New York, that, as the song goes, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And, I was just excited about the idea of living in New York, which was fantastic. I loved it. So there was a recession going on at that time. I decided to present my backer with, okay, look, I want to liquidate the business because I want to move to New York. You've made it clear that you're not going to continue to finance it. And I didn't want to keep doing it. I had gone through a lot at that point. I was 24 years old, 25, and had experienced a great deal. And I didn't even pause until then to even take stock of what I had done. And I think a lot of times we are victims of our own momentum. that you don't stop and think about what it is you're doing or why you're doing it. You just keep doing it. Then all of a sudden you find yourself middle-aged, expenses and burdens of that sort of thing in life. And you never really thought about, well, is this really what I want to be doing? And I started another clothing company because I was very saleable in that realm, built it up and sold it. And as I was in that process, one of the very nice people who I bought fabric from, and he was an owner of this fabric company, and he was kind of a mentor for me, a really good man. And he said to me, do you know anything about the film business? I said, well, I love film. I've read some books, but no, I don't really know anything about it. And he said, well, my son's your age and he won't listen to me. You've got a good head on your shoulders. You seem to know business. Would you mind meeting with my son? He's getting involved with these people. And I don't know, I just think that it would be good for you to meet him and him to meet you. So I did. And that was really interesting. He was making a movie with Dennis Hopper.
Oh, wow.
And it was based on a book by William Burroughs. The book was called Junkie, and it was William Burroughs is one of the cornerstones of the beat movement in the 1950s with Jack Kerouac, and he was really, Allen Ginsberg, all these people. It was quite an interesting era in our popular culture. And I started to get involved with that and learned a great deal about that. Not much about the film business, but about what it takes to actually get something done. Because at that time, Dennis Hopper, William Burroughs, Terry Southern, the people that I was working with were getting so high all the time, they never actually accomplished anything. And so it was, interesting, but the bloom went off the rose of celebrity pretty quickly, when you just realize, like most of us, these are flawed people, and sometimes it's miraculous to get anything done. But what it did do is expose me to some people in the business, and then ultimately an opportunity that I found really interesting, which I could parlay my fashion knowledge by shooting fashion shows, which had only been done with still cameras. And, I got some clients and that's how I segued into film production. Now, I had taken, by the way, a year off. After I sold the business, I had saved up enough money that if I lived frugally, I could travel the world and just experience more stuff, which is what I did. And then I had to do something again. And I met these people who had started a video company, and they really liked the knowledge I had about fashion. And I could speak to the designers and really engage them. And basically, I had a compelling offer for them in terms of videoing their show, which, they're always backstage fixing up the models and last touches before the models walk out. And they have to depend on their staff to tell them, oh, the audience liked it or didn't like it or whatever. And most of the times, employees are afraid to tell the boss if somebody doesn't like something or if it didn't work out. And it's just great education for the designer to be able to see their clothes, how they move on the runway, how people are responding to it, all that stuff. So I saw an opportunity there that I thought could be really, really valuable. And I started with these people, left after about 3 years to start my own company, which I did for about 40 some years and really enjoyed it, and had fantastic clients, like you mentioned. Did not want to be slotted so that I could only do fashion. So I did work for the Harvard School for Public Health, Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar. I did music videos. I did all kinds of stuff because I felt like the camera's my pen. I can write different stories with different things, and did all of that. And again, I found good people through other good people and worked in that medium, and I really loved it. So it was another transition where this time I literally locked myself in a room, in the control room, and taught myself how to edit. In the studio, I taught myself how to light, how to shoot camera, how to do all these things. And something I've always been good at is whether it's the relationships that I have since my childhood, or when I'm building a team, whether it's a production group to make films, or whether it's the people I've put together to produce my play, is putting together teams of really good people who have complementary talents and to create an atmosphere of very fertile collaboration. So I found that, wow, this is only limited by my imagination. I could do anything in doing this. And so I embarked upon a film career and doing that. And fortunately, that worked out. But again, it was teaching myself how to do something that I had never done before. And that's exciting to me. It's like people say about the play, well, now, is this a commercial project or is this a passion project? And my answer is yes. And I don't have to make a choice. It can be additive. It doesn't have to be an either or. And I tend to look at life that way. I don't have to make that choice. Why can't I do both?
Yeah, no, I agree. Can we focus a little bit in on this concept then of identifying opportunities? As you've been going, you've identified 2 specific opportunities that were pivotal in your career. I think now, maybe more than ever, it seems like opportunity is at every corner, right? And again, not to blame social media for all our ills, but there is a lot of, cool idea. And it's, I see a lot of people, including myself, sometimes chasing these things, right? Like, oh, I should do that. I should do this. I should do that. And I'm a notorious starter and not a great finisher as it comes to creating some of these little startup ideas, right? I have a great nugget of an idea. I'll build out the brand. I'll do all this stuff. And then I'll go, oh, well, I got to go back to work. I got to make money. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just identifying good opportunities and when they're worth the risk versus just sort of these fly by night things, or if there's any, I don't know, actionable or learnable moment there that you've gotten in. Certainly bad ideas were presented to you too. So maybe you can talk a little bit about filtering that out.
Well, what I filter out are things that either don't attract me, because money is not the number one thing to me. It never has been. So, I've been approached throughout my adult life with people, who have these ideas where, you could make a fortune doing X, which is immediately starts putting me into REM sleep, although I'm able to keep my eyes open. But, do I believe that? No. Because it's what I call the myth of replication. People who try to teach others that, if you do exactly as I do, you'll be as successful as I am. So you have the 7 highly effective habits of highly effective people. You're not one of those 7. You don't have the same life experience. You're not them. You don't have the same contacts. You don't have any. It's like, all of these things, because people are always looking for that magic bullet. It doesn't exist. If you're fortunate enough to be born into a whole lot of money, then you can screw around a lot and, take ridiculous chances because it's not going to jeopardize your home life. But I think that what's really important is, first of all, does it resonate with you? Is this something you're actually interested in? And if you're only interested, there's nothing to matter if you're only interested in making money. Nothing to matter with that. It's just that's not where I'm at, because I want to enjoy what I'm doing. At any point, I want to really enjoy the process, because the process to me is where it's at. It's really cool. I just came off of, 2 months of rehearsals and previews for my play. I loved every second of it, because it's just the dynamism of a creative process. It's not where we're going to make a fortune doing this. And that's not how I started the clothing company. That's not how I started my film production company. It's certainly not how I started teaching. I started doing it because it was really attractive to me. And I was seduced by the ideas of doing that. So I think you first have to look at yourself and ask yourself the question, well, what does success look like to me? What is success? Is success accumulation of wealth, and that's what your metric is? For me, the metric is fulfillment. Mm-hmm. How do I feel about what I'm doing? Is that something I really want to be doing? And people that I hire, my camera people, my editors were on staff. Camera people were always freelance, because I always used the best people and whatever I could find. And I had enough work to keep on staff editors. And when I would interview people, I'd say that I want you to want to show your friends the work you're doing because you think it's cool. They look at me Really? And I said, yeah. And I don't also never want you to show me work and say, I don't know, is this okay? Because if you aren't convinced it's okay yet, don't bother showing it to me. Show it to me when you're proud of what you're doing. Then I'll give you notes. But wait, now if you're stuck, I'll help you and we'll talk about it. But the point being is, I want you to use your creativity, your initiative, and I give full license and agency to the people that I work with to do that. And that extends to the actors that I'm working with. It extends to the editors I work with in all different levels of the business. And because I think that's how you also get the best out of people, is that they feel invested and involved in what they're doing.
I
So
agree.
in terms of finding the opportunity, finding the opportunity isn't that I look over their spreadsheets and their cash flows and all that, because that, for good or for bad, bores the shit out of me. So I'm not interested in that. I want to know it's a viable business if I'm going to invest in it. But if I'm going to invest my time, because the only thing that's not replaceable is time. You spend time, you spend money, you save time, you save money, but you can always get money back. You can never get the time back. And I'm telling you, it gets more and more precious as you get older because it passes faster and faster. So when you want to talk about scarcity in business, and that's a favorite topic of a lot of entrepreneurs, to me, the real scarcity is time. Everything else can be replaced, but you can't replace time. When that goes, it's gone.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack from what you just said there. I love the fact that you allow the creative person to actually put their creativity in it and actually require that of them and say, hey, when you're ready and you think it's good to go, then show it to me. Because I think a lot of people try to use their boss as a crutch, like, oh, what does he want? What is he looking for? I'm going to try and produce this content for him, like through his eyes, when really you're hiring someone to create in their own creative process and be themselves. And so I think if you're trying to, kind of appease the person in charge, it kind of limits what you're actually capable of and what you could actually produce. And you want them to have that drive to begin with. So if they're not, willing to put in that extra effort and willing to create that product, they might not be the right fit. Also, the thing that stood out to me in your story is you saw a need for people running the fashion show to see their work. If they're behind the stage and they can't see what's going on, and you can film it and you can review it, that right there was your aha moment for, say, like, oh, I could provide this service. There's a product, there's something there. Let's see how this works. And that opened the door for you to get into that career in that field. And I think a lot of times it's just a matter of stepping back, seeing the need and going from there versus trying to create something out of nothing, and just see what you can do to help, see what needs to be done, and then build around that.
Yeah. So I just kind of wanted to add to that too, especially as it pertains to creative people, and letting them be their creative selves. Like I didn't realize this early on in my sort of agency career, but as I got older, I started to understand that my trajectory, I always wanted to move to like a director level, right? I began life as a graphic designer and as an artist. And I wanted to go through all those channels and through those ranks and eventually rise to sort of a leadership position in a creative business. But what I didn't realize at first was that not everybody wants that. And so you mentioned, that you used freelance camera talent, for example, in your business. And I think the point is that those people don't want to be editors. They don't want to be directors. They don't want to be whatever. They want to be the best damn camera person they can be. And by bringing in people like that and then allowing them the creativity to flex in the thing that they're passionate about, I think is where people can actually find their joy. And so much of, I think, what happens in society is that, to Mike's point, that we're busy chasing somebody else's dream, right? We're trying to make something work for somebody else. We're trying to make something work for a director, or we're doing a job that we don't love, but, we got to pay a bill or whatever. And I think, it does sound a little cliche to say, chase your passions or do the things that you're passionate about. But I would say at the same time, like, you should like what you're doing, to your point about sort of preserving time, right? I mean, you should only really be doing the things that you like to do because the clock's ticking on it. So I really like that. So let's transition again and make this pivot, because I think what we're uncovering here is sort of a repeatable process. So we've mentioned a few times throughout this conversation your play, and so I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the play, what it's called, where it is, where people can see it, that sort of thing. But also just talk about moving into this new realm, right? So again, there are people who spend whole careers, going to school and learning to be a playwright and doing all this kind of stuff. Like, this is an industry that people, go into. And here again, for the third time in your career, without a ton of experience and without a ton of stuff, you've managed to leverage relationships and get into a position where you're doing the thing. And so I wonder if you wouldn't talk about, again, this pivot, and just sort of if we can start to really dig in and uncover the things that are repeatable. And I think we've hit a few of them. And I'd like to maybe dig in a little more on relationships and things like that. But I think we're starting to really come up with a process that it feels like other people could do, right? Or at least understand that this is the process. Like, your life experience is the way to do this. There is no path.
Well, and again, I think it's really important to ask yourself the question, what does success look like to you? To me, it's about being fully engaged in what it is I do, and really loving doing that, and loving working with the people that I work with. And that's critical to me. I know lots of people that are wildly successful financially who are miserable, but it's also becomes the golden handcuffs. You don't think you can do anything else because you could be jeopardizing that. And I've always wanted to be nimble in terms of what I do, and not be the slave to the work that I'm doing, but rather create the work I'm doing and be the master of that. That's what's much more interesting to me, because it's fulfillment. It's about working with other people who are like-minded, where you can do really good work and interesting things. And I've had that at each step along the way, which, that's the relationships part in terms of business that are really good. Find the best people, and you'll find other best people through those best people. And that's how you build a successful business, is to deliver on the promise that you're putting out there. And I think that's really, really important. What happened in this latest and newest iteration, there's a whole bunch of things, but it started when I got a phone call from a friend of mine. We became friends through business. He was the executive producer at Radio City Music Hall. And he called me up, and we had done that job together, which was quite successful. And he had left Radio City. And he said to me, "Do you know who Lloyd Price is?" And I said, "Mr. Personality?" "Yeah, I mean, Stagger Lee is one of my favorite songs, and I love Personality and Lottie Miss Claudie. So I don't know anything about him, but I like his music." And he said, "Well, we go to the same eye doctor, and we're sitting here in the waiting room, and I talked to him about you. And we'd like to do a short documentary. Want to come up with some kind of project. And would you mind if we came up and talked to you?" I said, "No, I'd love it." And so later that afternoon, I was sitting with John Bonanni, my friend who was the producer at Radio City, and Lloyd Price. And we just started talking. And as I got to know Lloyd, even a little bit in that conversation, then they hired me to do this documentary. I found, God, this guy's got an amazing, amazing story to tell. And nobody has told it. And he's an unsung hero. He was the first teenager to sell over 1 million records. He shattered the wall called race music, because when Lloyd was a kid, if you wanted to buy a record by a black artist, you had to go to a black-owned record store. You couldn't even get on jukeboxes in segregated restaurants, which they all were. And so Lloyd's rise to fame and his career, he had incredible obstacles to overcome. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So this guy shattered the wall called race music. First teenager to sell over 1 million records. He was the first black to open a nightclub below Harlem. He was the first musician of any color to start his own record label. So all of these things, it was just incredible. And we hit it off. And I did this documentary about him where I learned more about him, interviewed him for the documentary. We had become friends. We'd go listen to music together, which was a total blast. And then I said to him, Lloyd, I know I can capture your voice. I want to tell your story. Your story needs to be told. It's an incredible story. Because he not only opened the door for other Black musicians, he also opened the door for young musicians. Because prior to the 1950s, the record business was an adult business. Kids didn't buy records. It just wasn't a thing back then. So it involved everything that I am passionate about: music, politics, human rights, race relations, all of these things, all wrapped in a potentially fantastic story. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I had the added time to really think about it. I had already embarked on it, and then COVID hit. And I had already written the first draft. He'd already had a workshop and, about the play. And then the question was I going to go all in on this? I felt like I'd done my film production business and loved it, but I'd done that for like 45 years. And the old, if not now, when? Here is something where, and it touches on what you mentioned, Ryan, I'm not really all that interested anymore in solving other people's creative problems.
Love it.
I'm really good at it. I've done it my whole career. I'm interested in the creative expression is purely from me what I want to do. And I was very fortunate because I had established a lot of trust. I mean, I worked with Ralph Lauren for 38 years, and he can hire anybody he wants. And that's what he said to me, but I've chosen you. And, that's all great. It paid well, traveled the world, loved doing it. But now I wanted to tell the stories that I wanted to tell, that are important to me, that I think really say something. And so I decided I'm going all in on this. And I had closed my office because COVID killed all live production for about 18 months. And I was able to get out of my lease because my landlord tried to screw me. And he did me a favor by doing so, because that enabled me to get out of it. And I embarked on this all in. So I had been working on it for the past few years and brought it to the point of we did what's called a 29-hour. Then we did a year later the workshop, and then we got a theater deal that then was put on hold for over a year because of COVID. And it's because I was no longer satisfying for me to solve the problems of clients. I wanted to solve and devote myself to the creative ideas that I felt were most important to me. And then we get to well, if not now, when? And it was very clear, now's the time. And so I made that change.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, and unfortunately, we're starting to stretch and get here to the end of the show. And I mean, I could go on another hour. So anyway, I appreciate all that. And I think it's great. I mean, obviously timing is good, and Mike's going to roll his eyes right now, but there's this phrase that I always use every time I have these insecurities about where I'm at in my career and stuff like that. And I always say, it's taken every step I've ever taken to arrive at where I am today. Right. So no mistakes, no problems. The only way I get to where I am is by doing what I've done. And it seems like your career experience is a little bit that too, just in that, maybe as a young man, you never foresaw that you'd be doing this, playwriting and putting together a production like this. But each thing that you've done over the course of your career has built and built and built. And ultimately, with all the steps you took, you got to here. And so I think that your, career path is, first of all, very, very inspirational or interesting for people. But what I think I like most about it is sort of I don't know what I would call, based on our experience in doing so many interviews and all this other stuff, I would call sort of the fundamental truths of life, which is life is meandering. There is no direct path. There is no overnight success. There is no, none of these things. We all experience the insecurity. We all experience these things. We all have to develop confidence. I think the more that we can share that sort of human experience, the more valuable it is to not just our audience, but sort of, even me and Mike as hosts here. It's important to hear these kinds of messages, because I think that there's sort of this feeling in the ether that we should be doing things in a certain way, or that there's a path we need to follow. And to your point earlier about sort of getting wrapped up in what we're doing or being victims of our own momentum, I think it's really easy to focus on a direction and stick with it, even if it's not the course you really want to be on. So I really appreciate you sharing your life and your story and, the little tidbits along the way, because this has been awesome.
I'll give you another quick actionable point, and it's a question that I asked my guests in my class. And that is, if we'd have known you as a kid, would we have seen any indication of what you're doing now? Now, if you look back at me, I was always writing stories. I was messing around with home movies. We had an 8mm, camera, and, I could play with that if I wanted to. So I, was doing camera tricks and magic stuff with the camera and things like that were fun. And I looked at the things that fueled me when I was a kid. And when I had my 30th birthday some years ago, I was working, and a friend called me up, and she said, "Oh, I figured you'd be working. It's your 30th birthday. You realize that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do, of course." And she laughed. And, she said to me, "You're like you were when you were a kid. You get lost in the things that you're doing and just really invest yourself in that." And I think if you look at what gives you, and what I was doing, by the way, is I was editing a film and doing the soundtrack. And when I was a kid, I had a movie theater in my basement. I used my sister's portable stereo. The films were silent. I would tape record bits, sound effects, and bits from the music, match it up to the picture, so that I realized some years later when she called me, I was doing the same thing I was doing when I was 10 years old. And now I'm making a living at it. And it was cool. And I think it's really important to look at your own life. Don't look at other people as models. Look at your own life. What is it that you want to do? What gives you pleasure? What excites you? What engages you? And I think that is so important, because I think you have to look inward to get real answers. You can't be comparing yourself to others and using that as a measurement. I think that it's really important to know thyself. And I feel very fortunate in the parents that I had that encouraged me to do that. And I don't know that it was a knowledgeable thing. I don't know that it's because they had great insight. It's just they were great parents because they were great people, and they encouraged that. But I think, look at what engaged you when you were a kid. What gave you abandon? What did you love doing? How did you fill time? And what was it? Because maybe there's hints to the things that you could do and could apply yourself to that could make your life feel more fulfilling.
I love that. I look back, as a kid, 14 years old was my first paid gig as a DJ, and I'm still doing it. And Ryan's the same way. I mean, like, he was drawn in school and doing all this. He's very artistic and a very good graphic designer, and he's still doing that today. So I think that insight and, figuring out what you're passionate about and what you would be doing for fun and trying to make a career out of it, I think is key to not only being successful, but actually enjoying what you do in life. And I think that passion and the enjoyment is what, whether the money comes or not, if you can get by doing what you love, what's wrong with that? So, right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Like Ryan said, I think we could keep talking for another hour and not even realize it. I can't even believe it's been an hour so far. It just feels like it's been 10 minutes. So really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, so did I. And thank you for both of you guiding it so expertly. And I really, really enjoyed it. Wish this was in person and we'd order lunch.
Well, we'll do it again sometime. You got some great delis out there, but way better than we got out here. And I could use some pastrami. So we'll make a trip and we'll do it again. Jeffrey, before we get out of here though, anything you want to plug, places people should go to check you out, or if they want to connect with you, learn more, take your course, anything like that, anything you'd like to share?
Sure. So you can link up with me on LinkedIn. I post quotes and insights from the guests that I interview in the class. My book, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas, is sort of a distillation of a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And it's available at Amazon and all fine booksellers. And if you're in the Chicago area, see Personality, the Lloyd Price musical at the Studebaker Theater. I'm biased, of course, but the audience responses and the critical responses are so positive to what we've done. And I'm very, very proud of it and have worked with just amazingly talented people. And it has been and is a joy. And so please see that if you want. And if you want to see my film work, you can go to madoffproductions.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I really appreciate your time, man. This has been awesome. And we may just take you up on that lunch date one of these days. I'd appreciate it.
I would love it. Great
Awesome.
talking to you guys too. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. See you guys next time.